It's 6:30. You know what that means. It's time for staff picks. And that is a WPL program where library staff, us lovely people in the grid here, are from all across the system, are coming to get together to share our love of reading with you, the community. We want to start today by acknowledging that Winnipeg is located on Treaty 1 territory, the home and traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Ojibwe, the Innu, the Cree, and Dakota peoples in the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation in Treaty 3 territory. Thank you for being with us today. Each episode of Staff Picks has a theme, and staff pick a selection of books to do with that theme to share with you. And today's theme is celebrating Indigenous Reads for Indigenous History Month. Each of the books that we've chosen today are written by an Indigenous author. So let's get into the details before we get into the fun stuff. Every book that we feature today is available in the collection, sometimes in multiple formats and in multiple languages, which is awesome. The books in every episode will be listed in an info guide that you can look back to later, and this is also recorded so you can watch it again later. We've put a link to the info guide into the chat. Did that happen? No. Well, it'll be there. We have a librarian in the wings doing all of our magic. So the link to the info guide will be in the chat, but you can also find it on the library's website on the main page. There's that big Ask Us box. And underneath that is another box that says info guides. So if you go to the library website, you click on info guides, and then you scroll down to your next great read, and then you select staff picks on the next page. And then you'll see all of the books we've picked every time we've done the program so far. As I said, each session is recorded, so you can go back later on our YouTube and watch it. How does this work, you may ask yourself? Well, in a lovely round robin style, each staff member will take a turn talking about a book, and at the end, there's a lightning round of presentations. We are on Zoom. Technology is fickle. If something goes wrong, just exit out, and we have, as I said, our librarian in the wings will let you back in. Please keep yourself muted and your video off, because otherwise you'll be YouTube famous on the WPL channel. So let's introduce all these lovely staff members to you before we start. I guess I have to start with me because I'm talking. I'm Courtney. I'm the Idea Mill librarian here at Millennium. Then we have Allan. Hi, Allan.
Hello.
And he's the reader services here at Mill. Then we have Steph. Hi, Steph. Hey. And Steph is the branch head librarian at St. James. And then we have Joel. Hi, Joel.
Hello.
And Joel works at St. John's. That's us. Okay. I've already talked for 3 minutes and time is precious. So let's get going. My first book, I'm so excited to finally get to talk about this book, is The Marrow Thieves. Anybody read this one? Oh, it's so good. The Marrow Thieves is by Cherie Demeline. It's from 2017, so it's fairly recent still. It's not a terribly long book. It's like 231 pages. It's a YA fiction, if that changes your opinion about what you read at all, but it shouldn't because YA is awesome. The tagline that kind of came along with this one on the back of the book was, just when you think you have nothing left to lose, they come for your dreams, which is pretty intense. So the story is based around the fact in Canada, in the not so distant future, the world has kind of been ravaged by global warming, and the government is hunting down Indigenous people to harvest their bone marrow because they're the only people that can still dream, which is a pretty deep and dark way to start. It's described as a riveting, adventure-packed, coming-of-age story to find community and culture in the face of violence and dehumanization. Also very intense. However, she won a lot of awards for this book. It won the Governor General Literary Prize and won the Kirkus Prize. It was on Time's list 100 best YA books of all time. So when Cherie is talking about this book, she says the story does talk about commodification of culture, the loss and the importance of language, the roles of elders, and about the two-spirited community. But she hopes that the book starts a larger dialogue. It influences people's opinions, especially the youth, who are the change makers of tomorrow, and help people understand an Indigenous worldview, those are really great places to kind of, start a conversation from. And she says, despite the heavy nature of the book, that the story is really hopeful because although they're going through these horrific things, they're still finding love and community and their culture throughout the whole book, which is really lovely. I picked this book because when I picked it up, I couldn't put it down. And that's kind of my theme for the day. Every one of these ones that I read them in like 24 hours because it was not physically possible to put the book down. So yeah, that's all I'm going to say about it. The Merrill Thieves is amazing. It's the first book in a series. The second one is called Hunting by Stars. We have both of them. So go get both of them and read them, and then come talk to me in the email. All right, Allan, it's your turn.
All right. Hi, I'm Allan. So I picked Johnny Appleseed by Joshua Whitehead. Also, I read this one in 2 days, only because I had to save it for the next day. I didn't want to ruin it for myself and finish it in a day because every time I finish a book, I get mildly depressed. So I'd recommend this read for Pride Month, and it is also Indigenous History or History Month. So this was a 2021 Canada Reads winner, a Lambda Literary Award winner, was a finalist for the Governor General Awards, and the tagline for this book is a tour de force debut novel about a two-spirit indigiqueer young man and proud Indian glitter princess who must reckon with his past when he returns home to his reserve. Living in an urban setting and making it home a lot of times, as we know, can be pretty difficult. Johnny lives off reserve and he's trying to find ways to live and love in the big city. Johnny becomes a cyber sex worker who fetishizes himself in order to make a living. He's a self-ordained as an Indian glitter princess, and he has 1 week before he must return to the res to his former life to attend a funeral of his stepfather. Johnny's life is a series of breakages, appendages, and linkages, and as he goes through the motions of preparing to return home, he learns how to put together the pieces of his life. So he has like these relationships with his friends in the city, with his family back home, accepting who he is as a queer person, learning about his family past, and trying to come to terms and accept himself, his family history. Colonization is a theme, and it's a really good book. And I would suggest this book to everyone who likes Indigenous authors. I guess I don't know. Oh man, that's my first book. That's my first pick. And yeah, I'll pass it on.
It's a good one. I liked that one when I read it.
It is a good one. I think it's me next, correct?
It is. It's your turn.
Okay, so my first choice is There, There by Tommy Orange. Tommy Orange is an enrolled member of the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes of Oklahoma. We have this book in a whole bunch of different formats. We have the print version, the ebook version, e-audiobook. It's even a book on CD if you still have a CD player. And we also have it as a book club kit, which is really great if you want to read it with your book club. The title There is both a reference to a Radiohead song, but also an often misunderstood quote by writer Gertrude Stein, where she's talking about Oakland, California, where the book takes place and where the author Tommy Orange was born and raised. The book was published in 2018, and during that year, Barack Obama named it as one of his books of the year. It was also listed as a Pulitzer Prize finalist, and it won the American Book Award, among a bunch of other accolades. The prologue of the book is a series of vignettes on the continued violence that Indigenous people in the US have had to face, and obviously there's a lot of Canadian overlap there as well. It is one of the most stunningly written, heartbreaking and influential essays I think that I've ever read. So I feel like even if you feel like this book isn't for you, I urge you just to pick it up and read those first 9 pages. The prologue kind of really sets the stage for the rest of the novel, where you can see the effects of this violence on the contemporary characters, of which there are 12. So we're following 12 different characters around as they all are making their way to the big Oakland powwow, and they're all going there for different reasons. And as you read, you kind of realize that all of the characters are connected in different ways, and that's revealed to the reader kind of as we go. I will warn you, there are a lot of characters and perspectives, so it's easy to kind of get a little bit turned around, but I think if you're willing to be patient, it's really worth it. One of the most interesting parts of the book for me were the scenes that took place during the occupation of Alcatraz. And this was a 19-month-long protest that happened between 1969 and 1971, where 89 Indigenous folks and their supporters occupied Alcatraz Island. And this really happened. I had absolutely no idea about this until I read the book, so I found that super interesting. I also chose the novel for a couple other reasons. First, I've read a lot of Indigenous writers with books that are set in Canada, but I think this is the first novel that I've read within the American context. So I found that really interesting to kind of see the similarities and differences in experience. And secondly, it is just such a powerfully poetic book. It's really carefully written. It calls to be really carefully read. At the risk of sounding completely pretentious, this is the type of book that you'd really like if you enjoy like a very literary book. I always kind of say that I wish it was around when I was doing my English degree, because I would have just absolutely loved to have written a paper on it, as nerdy as that sounds. This is definitely a book for people that want to be challenged, because you're really asked to kind of think hard and make connections and ask questions and gain new perspectives. Last thing I'm going to say is a few months ago, Tommy Orange released his second book called Wandering Stars, which tells the stories of many of the ancestors of the characters found in There. And this time he put a family tree at the beginning of the book, which I think will be much appreciated by most of the readers, because when I was reading There, I was having to draw my own family tree. But it's a great book. Highly recommend.
Just go. All right. Yeah, so for my first one here, I noticed when I was looking at the list of which books everyone has picked, I've noticed most of them are fiction. So I decided to be the black lamb and be the nonfiction guy. So I have four nonfiction and one fiction. And the first one I picked here was Peace and Good Order by Harold Johnson. Oh, Peace and Good Order: The Case for Indigenous Justice in Canada. So Harold Johnson, he was a lawyer, Crown prosecutor in Saskatchewan. He's of Cree origin, I believe. He just passed away actually in 2022. And this version of the book has a new afterword by him. I guess right before he passed away, they republished it. Essentially, a case he makes is how the Canadian justice system is failing Indigenous people. I think he makes the case that it's working as it was meant to. It's not broken. It's working as it was meant to, and needs to be severely reformed. He talks about how Indigenous people are framed as criminal, even within, like, there's the state as well as the media, but also and then just general population, but also within Indigenous communities, like the lateral violence, I believe is what it's called. How people are inherently criminalized, and he does say in the book that he's like, there are people who should be in jail, but he says I haven't met any of them. That most of the vast majority of the people that he dealt with as a Crown prosecutor were people who were in the wrong place at the wrong time, were dealing with issues of trauma, self-medicating, or just making mistakes like a lot of young people or people do, and that by putting a label of criminal, it dehumanizes the person, which allows for systems of mass incarceration like we have in the United States. It's far worse, mostly because there's just more people there, and they're, the hyper power, the empire of the day for now. That 25 of all the prison population in the world, 25% of them are American, and most of them, of course, Black and brown people far out of proportion to the amount of the proportion to their population, which is exactly the same in Canada, especially in provinces like Manitoba and Saskatchewan. That the Indigenous population in our prisons is far out of proportion to their actual population numbers, and that but it allows us to ignore it by labeling them criminal, and then it allows politicians to use these slogans of being tough on crime in order to gain more votes, working on people's fear, of which we have far too many politicians trying to take advantage of people's fear. And that he says in the book that the sloganeering and use of fear will only bring more police and longer sentences, which will not reduce, which he says will not reduce violence in many of these communities that he lives on or lived on. That it will not, and you can see in the United States, longer sentences and more policing is not working. Another point that he talks about is that one of his brothers was actually killed by a drunk driver, but that the author sees redemption as possible, that we have to be able to see the vast majority of these people as being able to have some sort of redemption. And he has met this person who killed his brother, and he takes him to different schools and different talks to talk about his healing journey, and says like it would be he says in the book that it would be ridiculous to put him in jail for 3 years. It's not going to heal him. It's not going to heal me. It's not going to help the community at all. That it's far better for him to go and go through this process of talking about what happened, which is a far less punishment oriented justice system, and a more redemptive, merciful, and a more Indigenous way of dealing with the justice system. So this was, my wife is also a lawyer. She finished this in 2 days. I think I also finished in 2 days. It's very easy to read, like in terms of the writing style, the content. Most of these books, the content is heavy, but the writing style is makes it easy to read. So yeah, I would highly recommend this one.
I got to meet Harold when I worked up north, and he was such an intelligent, well-spoken advocate for the Indigenous community. And his fiction and nonfiction books are just stellar. He's a huge loss losing him. Anyway, we're going back into YA now. But it's the one that our premier wrote. Has anybody else read this one? No? Okay. I do YA a lot. I do fantasy a lot and feminist stuff, but I break out sometimes. This is awesome. It's so interesting how many people can do so many varied things. Like Harold, fiction, nonfiction, whatever you can be. That's kind of one of the reasons I picked this book, Walking into Worlds, because spouse, parent, musician, politician, leader, like it's just a nice way to kind of see, to show youth especially, you can dream and then put it out into the world, and it can really turn into something magical that can rally people together. So Walking into Worlds is kind of like a sci-fi speculative fiction for YA. We have it in every format as well as French, which is really cool. And it's about a teenage girl named Bugs. She was just like everybody else until she went online. So teenagers are tough. It's hard being a teenager, right? We remember. She's trying to find herself in all of her worlds. Real life, when she lives on the reservation, she's shy. She navigates insecurities and a lot of gender-based exclusion from traditional aspects of her community. And then there's an online world called the Floraverse. She's a formidable warrior who creates mythical creatures to battle the alt-right misogynistic group Clanless. Huzzah. Down with misogyny. She finds an ally in Feng, who is a recent immigrant from China who's living on the reserve because his aunt is the doctor there. And he's also trapped between two worlds. So she's starting to see how different cultures have the same problems within their communities and all those kind of things. And they have to decide kind of as individuals and as friends how to navigate these family challenges and community trauma to reconcile the parallel aspects of their lives. So it's themes are kind of like video gaming, self-discovery, community, technology, things like that. I picked it because I read it and I couldn't put it down. And it's just really interesting take on YA sci-fi with a very specific point of view that highlights things you don't encounter all the time. So I really like that. It's the first of a series. The next one just came out this year. And it's called The Everlasting Road. So that's Walking in Two Worlds. It's your turn again, Alan.
Hello. So my second pick is The Inconvenient Indian by Thomas King. This is a hard copy, so it's pretty big. So this author is pretty witty. He's funny, straightforward. He brings Indigenous issues to light, and he's able to contrast current political issues across Turtle Island with Indigenous issues. He's genius in his storytelling. He weaves together all the incidents, all the events from contact until now. He's able to tell North American history from an Indigenous perspective. He also authors Indians on Vacation and many others. So this guy's pretty witty. He has lots of like knee-slapping truth. He provides really good analysis of Indigenous issues in North America. He talks about current issues that, sorry, he talks about North American history and tears our understanding of it out of left field. He provides rebuttals on common misconceptions of Indigenous people. For example, the constant question of why don't you just get over it? He comically asks about Indigenous history and what we should forget. He also provides a roadmap for a pathway to reconciliation, and he has like good advice on how to do that. I guess in The Inconvenient Indian is at once a history of the complete subversion of a history, a short, critical, and personal meditation of the remarkable Thomas King, which has, over the past 50 years, known what it is meant to be Indian in North America. This book also touches on Alcatraz. It was a finalist for 2015 Canada Reads, winner of the 2015 CBC Bookie Awards, and many others. Thank you.
Excellent.
Sorry, I'm pretty nervous.
Oh, you're doing great, Alan.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
I was gonna just riff off of you. This wasn't one of my choices, but Thomas King in 2003 had the CBC Massey lectures, and they publish a book afterwards, and his is called The Truth About Stories, and it's like just so well done, and we also have it in our collection. So just that's a little bonus recommendation for everybody. My second choice is Monkey Beach by Eden Robinson. And I realized also when I was going through the books that I had chosen, that like I picked all of them, and I realized that every single one of them happened to be a debut novel, which I think just really speaks to the incredible amount of writing talent there is in amongst Indigenous authors, that you can just like write so well out the gate. So that was kind of interesting to see that. Monkey Beach, Eden Robinson. Eden Robinson is a member of the Haisla and Heiltsuk First Nations. This book is available in print as well as on ebook. And it is also one of those books that I just couldn't put down. I have vivid memories of reading it over a weekend one summer. And it's also one of those books that I'm afraid to read again in case it's not as good as it is in my head. Like, it just holds such a special place in my heart. The book was shortlisted for the Scotiabank Giller Prize and a nominee for the Governor General's Award, which again, just like first book, that's pretty amazing. It is the story of Haisla teenager Lisa Marie Hill, whose brother Jimmy has mysteriously gone missing at sea while out on a fishing trip. And there are some questions surrounding his disappearance, as Jimmy was an Olympic hopeful in swimming. So while Lisa is waiting on news of her brother, much else is revealed about her own complicated life, from, her situation at school, her, use of alcohol and drugs, finding and keeping family secrets, the death of loved ones. There's a lot going on in this book, not to mention the fact that Lisa has premonitions and also has the ability to see and communicate with otherworldly beings and animals. And one of the creatures that kind of takes up space in this book is the Sasquatch. And Monkey Beach is nearby, like on a nearby shore that is famed for Sasquatch sightings. So as a result of all of this, the book has been described as magical realism. It also kind of weaves in and out of dreams and reality, as well as the past and the present. Eventually, Lisa sets off alone through Douglas Channel to try and find her brother Jimmy, and she goes right to Monkey Beach. When I was in library school, I learned that when reading fiction, people primarily read for one thing, either for language, for setting, for characters, or for plot. And I primarily read for language. And while this is a beautifully written book, I think it's also one of the best examples of a novel that can kind of capture the attention of any kind of reader. It's a novel full of compelling and complicated characters that I was really invested in. The plot is super interesting. Obviously, it starts dramatically with this missing teen, but so much is revealed throughout the book. I was as captured by descriptions of this little greasy fish called olicans. To me, that's a marker of a good book, that if you're as enthralled by accounts of like how this fish is caught and prepared. And then as far as the setting goes, it takes place in the community of Kitimat on the coast of British Columbia, which is Robinson's hometown. They're beautifully vivid descriptions of the scenery that really makes you feel like you're there and that you want to go. And last thing is that there was a film made of the book in 2020, and local actor Adam Beach was in that movie. I have yet to watch it, but it's on my list. So that's my second pick, Monkey Beach.
Okay, so for my next one, another nonfiction, it's called Seeing Red. History of Natives in Canadian Newspapers. It's written by Mark Anderson and Carmen Robertson. So Carmen Robertson is Lakota and Scottish, so of mixed ancestry, and then Mark Anderson is a settler scholar. They're both at the University of Regina. I'm realizing a lot of these books are academic, but if you can make it through academic books, then these are the books you should read. So this one is really interesting. It really exemplifies that kind of, that the idea of history is change, the study of change over time. I don't know if anyone can tell I have a master's in history degree by the way I'm talking and the books I've picked. But essentially, it examines the psyche of Canadian imperialism through newspapers and how Indigenous people were being represented in the main media of the time. And it goes from, I believe, the not the Northwest Resistance, the Red River Rebellion, or the Red River Resistance, to Idle No More. So it takes the whole gamut of Canadian history and Indigenous history under Canadian imperial domination. And so it's not so much an Indigenous history as a history of what Canadians thought of Indigenous people and of themselves, although obviously Indigenous people are involved in this because they're the ones being represented and stereotyped for the most part. So it's not what settlers did, but what they thought of Indigenous people and thought of themselves. And they sort of, and throughout the book, there is change, obviously, but there's still that the same kind of, we are better than these people. We are, we know what's best for them kind of. You can see that from like 1869 to I think 2011 when the book was published. It's the same kind of, they have these typecast characters that they put in with that Indigenous people are associated with crime, laziness, sneakiness, and a resistance to progress. Like, oh, they don't want the railroad. Oh, they don't want, and you hear that now even, that, oh, they don't want to move off of reserves. We should just move them all off reserves. Well, I've heard family members say that. It's just like, oh, brother. Like, it's that same, they don't want to be part of our great white world that we've created, which is yeah, you see that throughout the book, and it shows Canadian racism and how it morphs from who they are, like the very virulent, we are like racially better than them, like who they are, to what they do. So now we have, oh well, we'll have, you know, some, as long as they don't make trouble, as long as they don't protest or, you know, have civil disobedience like you saw at Elsipogtog in 2013, as long as they don't put the brakes on the exploitation train, then everything's fine. Then we don't need to. Then they're the good ones, right? That's kind of the discourse we have in our current era. And then, of course, always comparing to the U.S., like, oh, the U.S., they were very violent and killing, and we didn't do that because we're better than them, and always comparing ourselves to and trying to make ourselves feel better. I feel like New Zealand has that with Australia, like, oh, we're not as bad as them. So it's an easy way to kind of ignore the crimes that are being committed. And as over time, it becomes less and less blatant. Like, you can't see it as obviously in our current era because they don't need to be as blatant anymore, because they've already established a state, they've gained control, but also that these colonial discourses, when you repeat them enough times, it kind of becomes the normal, and it sinks in. And this is what he talks about in the end, about presupposition of Indigenous stereotypes. That you don't need to, like, it's like you don't need to educate people on what a horror movie is, because you've seen it so many times, you know what a horror movie is. And similarly, when people talk about the North End, where I'm currently sitting, you don't need to say, oh, there's lots of Indigenous people there and there's lots of crime and it's scary and you don't want to go there, because it's been repeated so many times. You don't need to say that at all. I think people will automatically presuppose in their mind. And so that's sort of what he discusses from 1869 to 2011. So yeah, if you like historical stuff and you're interested in newspapers and how the Canadian state has seen Indigenous people, this is the book to read.
All right, it's challenge time, people. Library staff talk too long.
Sorry.
It's a great problem to have. No, it's not. It's all of us.
Okay.
So now the challenge is we have 12 books in 12 minutes. So you get a minute each. So here we go. I'm going to talk about 2 books in 1 minute. Let's do this. Okay, Angeline Woolley is an American who writes amazing mystery thrillers based off of the reservation. That's where these people live. So the first one, is called Firekeeper's Daughter. It's from 2021, and it is about a story about a young woman named Donis who witnesses her friend's murder and becomes involved in an FBI investigation around a new drug. How far is she going to go to protect her community if it means tearing them apart? So this book is a thriller. It says it's YA, but it's not, and it's a bigger one. We're getting farther here. But it's layered with a really rich exploration of the modern Indigenous experience and a reckoning of current and historical injustices, and it's a celebration of community. And this book, Donis, is the aunt in this book, so her niece, so is like mentioned slightly in the first book, is this book called Warrior Girl on Earth, which takes place in Sugar Island, which is around Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan. Perry planned to have a relaxing summer, and then she got an internship and ended up having to fight for her community, including rescuing artifacts that have been stolen by grave robbers and the government. So they're both very interesting takes on current Indigenous issues that are really well done in YA and makes it really accessible for people to learn about some of these things. On her website, Bully just says there are too few stories told by and about Indigenous girls and women, especially from a contemporary viewpoint. So that's where she was coming from. And I think knowing that makes the voices even stronger. Allan, 1 minute, your turn.
1 minute, 1 minute. Okay, so Unjust Society, Harold Cardinal. If I read this in University One, and this was probably the beginning of my political awakening. I say this book is a book everyone interested in Indigenous issues should read at least once in Canada. It's Harold Cardinal. It's a rebuttal to John Chrétien's and Pierre Trudeau's essay on and the white paper on a just society. Yeah, Harold Cardinal, perfect rebuttal, very witty. I would suggest that one. Robopocalypse. This is AI. Robots take over the world. And I can't believe this is not a movie. It's a perfect science fiction thriller. There are robot wars, AI, artificial intelligence, which I think today, this was written in 2011. And contrasting today, what is happening in politics and around the world, this would be a perfect read for today. Go ahead.
Okay, Courtney, do you want me to do all three of mine really quick?
No, that was one
Ju-
pick. I just couldn't pick between them.
Okay. Okay. Okay, so I'll go really quickly on
Yeah.
to my third, which is In Search of April Rain Tree by Beatrice Moisinaire. It is a book that's based on her own life in the child welfare system in and around Winnipeg. It's very much about the 60s scoop. It's arguably one of the most important Indigenous novels in Canada, in part because it was one of the first Indigenous novels in Canada, published in 1983. The following year, there was an abridged version that was kind of deemed like the high school or the YA version that took a couple scenes out of it. The novel is about two young sisters, April and Cheryl. April narrates the novel. She has kind of paler skin like her mom. Her sister Cheryl is 18 months younger, looks more like her father with dark hair, dark eyes. And it's kind of about their process going through the foster care system, staying connected as sisters, and how they just make different choices throughout their life, but stay close, and navigating the challenges and resilience.
Okay, so for this one, I did Red Skin, White Masks, Rejecting the Colonial Politics of Recognition by Glenn Couthard. So this is based off the more famous book, Black Skin, White Masks by Frantz Fanon, who was a black guy from Martinique who went to Algiers to fight the French. And essentially, it talks about how that this kind of diversity affirming forms of the culture that we have now can be used by the state to reproduce systems or of that are unfree or not mutually helpful, and that it's an accommodation to have this diversity affirming system, but that it's always controlled by the powers that be, by the dominator, by the state, and that it will put a friendly face on an exploitative and rapacious oligarchy. Let me try to say that in a better way, that the systems of exploitation that we have in Canada will have an Indigenous face, because they will use that, they will find someone that is like them but has the right color skin in order to exploit and steal from the land and from their own people, because you have that exactly the same thing in African and Asian countries. When the British or French or whoever left, they put in the guy who looks like the people who threw them out, but ends up becoming just like the colonial power from before. And that the abuses of settler colonialism always placed in the past. We never talk about what's happening right now. This is part of the problem with reconciliation, and that he basically says we need to shift away from this kind of rights-based recognition politics to a real decolonization and alternative systems of law and economics. And my favorite line of his is that For Indigenous nations to live, capitalism must die. And that was my favorite line from that book. Okay, I hope that was under a minute.
You did good. I also have a nonfiction pick. I know, crazy, right? Seven Fallen Feathers. Has everybody read this one?
Yes.
Yes. If you haven't read this one, go put a hold on it right now. Literally didn't sleep, read it right away. It's called Seven Fallen Feathers, Racism, Death, and Hard Times in a Northern City. It's by journalist Tanya Talega. It's a groundbreaking, multi-award winning national bestseller. It's about systemic racism, education, the failures of policing and justice systems, and Indigenous rights. Sorry, I'm not speaking clearly. This book is about 7 Indigenous high school students from Northern Ontario who went to Thunder Bay for school because there was no high school in their home, and they didn't come back because they passed away. The 7 Fallen Feathers are the 7 students, and their names were Jethro Anderson, Curran Strang, Paul Panachees, Robin Harper, Reggie Bushy, Kyle Morrisseau, and Jordan Wabos. And everybody needs to read this book. That's it. It is hard truths. It's still going on. It's just nobody talked about it. And when she found out about it, she was writing a different book, and this is the book that we got instead. And it's just read it. Please just read it. It's just really important. And that's all I'm going to say about that one. Steph, I think it's your turn because Allan did 2 and 1 super fast. Good job.
Okay, perfect. So my next one is Half Breed by Maria Campbell. It's a memoir that was published in 1973 by Métis writer Maria Campbell. We have it in print, ebook, and e-audiobook. The book is a raw account of the author's childhood growing up in northern Saskatchewan in the 1940s. The reader is taken on a journey across Canada's west as Maria contends with a life of poverty and addiction. At the root of the book, it's really a story about family with the spirit of Maria's Cheecham, or her Cree great-grandmother, sustaining her through desperate times and eventually kind of causing her to take pride in her Métis heritage. Like In Search of April Raintree, it's a story of resilience that's considered to be a foundational work of Indigenous lit in Canada. And I just want to end my turn by saying that in the afterword of the most recent edition of the book, Maria explains how 50 years ago she owned 4 books by Indigenous writers and how she held those really dear. And now she can't afford to purchase everything that's being published, which really speaks to A, the need for public libraries, so you don't have to buy everything, and B, what we're here to talk about today, which is a celebration of Indigenous writers. Done.
Right.
Good job.
This is my last nonfiction one. It's called Structures of Indifference, An Indigenous Life and Death in a Canadian City. And it's by Mary Jane McCallum and Adele Perry, both of whom I know personally. And this is my own copy. And I got it signed as well when they published it. This is a really, like, if you care about truth and reconciliation, this is the book to, and you don't, and like reading isn't your thing, this is the book to read. It's very well written. It's only 145 pages with pictures. So it's not, and it kind of epitomizes Canadian colonialism. It's about Brian Sinclair, who died in 2008 by essentially being ignored to death at the Health Science Center. And it's really, the book is organized really well. It goes through the city, the hospital, the man. So it goes through each, how all these forces of colonization led up to this person being ignored for, I think it was over 30 hours for something that was very easy to fix. And unfortunately, he passed away. And the most interesting thing about this that I found was that when HSC put out their report of how what happened and how we can fix it, they mostly focused on triaging because the nurses ignored him. And they talked about it being a perfect storm, like, oh, this would never have happened normally. But that was the main focus of the report. The word triage was mentioned 350 times. The word race and racism was mentioned 13 times. That just kind of gives you an idea of what their focus was on. And this is kind of a response to that report. And it's awesome. And again, easy to read. I finished this in like a day. So yeah, but I read fast.
Yeah. Okay, last round. We may be a little bit over, but it's really worth your time because these are all excellent picks. My last pick is Song with My Heart, which is a book that is written by David Bouchard. based on the remembrances of artist Allan Sapp's childhood, which is really great. We have a couple of different copies of this book, but I picked this one because it has both English and Cree, as well as a CD with Cree music that comes with it. So there are a couple different options that you can get, but it's just, David Bouchard is amazing. If you've met him, which I have, because I love storytellers, he's just a really rich storyteller, and you can hear his voice in this. He is amazing. He just tells great stories. And so that is the one that I recommend. I also recommend this one, which is like my favorite book of all time. If you don't know this one and you're from the prairies, you should read it now. And now I'm done talking. Steph, it's your turn.
Okay, my last pick is called Keeper and Me by Richard Wagamese, who is an Ojibwe writer. It's the story of Garnet Raven, who's taken away from his reserve at the age of 3 and placed in a series of foster homes. After escaping in his mid-teens, he eventually lands in jail, where he receives a letter from his biological family. After being released from jail, he returns to White Dog Reserve, where he reconnects with his biological family, in addition to a new way of life and a new identity. My favorite parts of the book were the beautiful descriptions of the Kenora area where the reserve is located close to, and also just a number of really humorous scenes that I wasn't expecting, that I was just laughing out loud. I also wanted to mention that Richard Wagamese is a prolific writer. He passed away in 2017, and there's this really beautiful piece in the Globe and Mail after his death that I think is going to be put in the chat, and it's all about how he and a librarian in St. Catharines, Ontario, really just kind of changed each other's lives. So it's very heartwarming. Yeah.
Love a good library moment.
Love it.
Okay, last one. Here's my fiction. So this is Take Us to Your Chief and Other Stories by Drew Hayden Taylor. This is like these are a bunch of short stories. They're kind of like, they're sci-fi infused with Indigenous like stories and mythology. So it blends it really well. It doesn't seem like it's kind of like just shoehorned in there. It puts it really in really well. So it uses, like, there's one about AI, there's one about time travel, there's one about aliens. And so he blends the Indigenous mythology in, along with commenting on like current issues facing Indigenous people in Canada. So there's one where there's a boy who was thinking about committing suicide, and suddenly all his toys, like his old toys, because he's like a teenager, come to life and start talking to him. And this one, that's the front of it is a robot that starts talking to him about how you shouldn't do that, because of the idea that all, like the Indigenous idea that everything has a spirit within them. And then there's another good one where a superhero, there's an Indigenous superhero from a reserve who calls himself Thunderbird, but then starts to get sued by all these sports teams because they're like, they see him stealing the name or whatever. So he just kind of this commentary on how the law is used against Indigenous people a lot of the time, and it ends up being, or it says that he got the superpowers because of mold on the reserve. So again, commenting on the lack of proper housing on reserves while talking about superheroes and all those kind of things. So there's my fiction for everybody. I recommend this one.
All right, we did it. That was a lot of good books, guys. Good. Whoo! Got through it, did it. So like, this is 20 books. Now we have more than that. It's the tip of the iceberg. We have so many more Indigenous reads for all ages and genres that you can connect with. We'll put the links in the chat, but we'll also send them out in our email. We have an Indigenous resources collection that highlights things as well as book lists and other stuff on the website. So you can access that through the website or through the chat, or ask library staff for more details, because they know where to find the things. We just want to thank you for being here with us today. We'll be emailing you an evaluation for the program, so let us know what you thought. We love feedback, so let us know. That's it for this edition of Staff Picks. We'll be back again in August, and we'll be talking about audiobooks. That's it. So have a great night, everybody. Bye.